Cherokee is the go-to tribe for anybody wanting to like spice up their genealogy. Are people good at just ascertaining indigeneity just by looking? Iffy. But is he native, woman? Please tell us, is he native? What's up, Avatar Gang? Welcome to Gaang Gaang, the low-key podcast that will be covering the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender for as long as I feel like. I'm Delia, and today we're going to be talking about hashtag Sokkagate, as I will be referring to it. I definitely made that up. That's not what it's called, but that's how we're going to refer to it throughout this episode. Otherwise known as the Ian Ousley casting debacle that happened, well, is currently happening, but happened back in 2021. This isn't going to be your average drama recap. Instead, we will be discussing my thoughts and opinions as an actual Cherokee Nation citizen. They may not be what you think. So, if you're wanting to know the Sokka casting lore, whether the actor's ethnicity matters, or how native identity works, today's episode is for you. It's gonna be a fun one, and maybe a long one. So, if you're on YouTube, make sure to go ahead and give the video a like so I can know if this is something y'all are into. And if you're not on YouTube, what's up, Pod Gang? We appreciate you. We like you. 5-star it. Do whatever other things you can do on podcasting platforms. But before we jump into today's topic, we must first address what's the Avatar state of the Union. So in Avatar news, first and foremost, we had the premiere, the Avatar: The Last Airbender live action premiere. And, the only thing I care about to talk about from the premiere, not because it wasn't good, it was good. It was a moment to see the cast interacting with each other, to see the people who showed up, some people you wouldn't expect, to this premiere. But who cares? We're talking about Gya Wendio's dress. Gya Wendio's dress. Oh my, it was so pretty. I can't. Look, I didn't even think to expect fits. It was not a thing that occurred to me to look out for, but her dress. So she's wearing, for people in audio who cannot see, she's wearing this like blue taffeta, I think. Like it's like almost this like duo shifting taffeta dress that's like mermaid, but the bodice is beaded to the gods, and the front has like this wave pattern that like has a rainbow streak through it. It sounds magical. I know the way I'm describing it sounds like magic, like the type of dress I want to see in a fantasy, but it's real. And on the back, so if you were only looking at Netflix's account or Avatar's live action account, you would not have seen this. But if you were online, if you are in the fandom, if you're in the brain rot, you did see the back of the dress, and the back of the beadwork on the back is Tui and La, and in the center is, bring it down, is like a rendition of Aang's scar that he gets in season 2. When, he's, I guess, should I say spoilers? Do we care about spoilers on the show? Don't know. He gets a scar on his back. So that's on the dress. If you are listening on podcast, I'm going to link to all of this. The dress was done by Evan Ducharme, and the beadwork was done by Tasha Marie Designs. And Tasha, you're not watching this, but if you are, y'all ate that up. Oh my gosh. I am obsessed. I love it. That was my top news. In other news, because there's other news, sure, why not? The reviews have come out because, there was a premiere. So, there were industry people, and it's been very strange. I have seen a plethora of reviews, but I've seen it. There's nothing in the middle. It's either this is everything we wanted from a live action, or all of our fears have come true. So do with that what you will. I still have a lot of hope. I'm not like frightened by any of it, but it is strange to me. So I'm curious what that means is going to be on the screen, because how could you have such a polarizing show when the trailer looks so good? So we're going to find out. Next, Metro UK, they did interview Ian Ousley. Speak of the devil. But they interviewed him, and he talked about Sokka's character, because everybody was up in arms a couple of weeks ago, like, Sokka's not sexist. If he's not sexist, who is he? So Ian went on the record trying to put everybody at ease, fans at ease. I don't know if it worked or not. I just happened to see it. He says, I think that the essence of the character of Sokka is 100% the character that is portrayed in the live action version of the show. I think the fans are a little worried that there's going to be changes in who Sokka is, and I don't really think that's been the case at all in our show. Obviously, it's different from an animated show to a live action in those ways, but the heart and soul of the animation show is the breath that we're all playing into. So there you go. I've given you, I think, the entire quote that I could find. Take from that what you will, but I kind of feel like personally everybody's minds are made up one way or the other. To me, I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds like what I thought, so I'm not worried. But if people are really still concerned and are mad, I don't think that's going to change their mind. Sorry to Ian. He tried though. He gave it a good college try, and you could tell he has gotten some PR lessons, and good for him. Good for him. And our last piece of news. Okay, it's almost as big as Gallandio's dress. Almost. Serena Williams? Hello? So, if you don't know the Serena Williams Avatar lore, she has played a role, I think, of a Fire Nation side character. I really don't remember, but she played a character in the original series. She is an Avatar fan, which I'm telling you, Black people, we love Avatar. Okay? We love Avatar. So I'm not surprised to see her excited about this, but she does a promo that Netflix released, and it is so cool. I literally am not going to tell y'all anything about it. I just want to say, 1, I stan. 2, go watch it. I will link it in the description / show notes wherever you are. So that's the Avatar State of the Union. Things are good. I really feel like the fandom, we have come up a lot. I feel like we are in a good spot, and I love that for us. Anyway, I want to caveat everything we're going to talk about today with the fact that I was a little worried making this episode. I know I said I was going to do it, but I did get nervous in the process of coming up with the script, the outline, researching to make sure I wasn't saying anything wrong, because you can have an experience, but is it right? I really just want to be here to give my perspective as a Black Cherokee native. But even though that's all I'm trying to do, I'm sure there are going to be non-native folks who will watch this and take my opinion as the native opinion, which is not my intent. That is absolutely not my intent. I would rather share my opinion and thoughts to be another voice among the patchwork of native opinions, all of which are important. And I hope that you go seek out others, even though this tea is stale and old and maybe they're harder to dig up. So caveat out of the way. We have an understanding, you know the drill. Let me explain Sokkagate, as, again, I am calling it. For those who weren't keeping up with every news drop about the live action because we weren't sure if we cared about it yet, or maybe you just need a refresher, I know that I did. So Sokkagate starts in August 2021 when the main cast is announced. So this is when we're introduced to Gallandio, who's playing Katara, to Ian, who's playing Sokka, and Gordon, who's playing Aang. We're getting the main cast, we're getting Zuko, yada, yada, yada. And when I say immediately, I mean immediately discourse around colorism took off. As that happened, people online were quick to point out that Ian, playing Sokka, doesn't look native. They began speculating that Ian, a then 19-year-old cast to play Sokka, might not actually be native at all. A lot of these people, I do want to highlight, were in fact native. Others were allies. So I do think it was natives that started the conversation that I can see going back and in my memory, but I think it was galvanized by allies. Quickly, hashtags began circulating like hashtag remove white Sokka and even hashtag no pretend Ian. So Pretendian is a derogatory word that we natives use for people who are playing Indian, Pretendian. It's kind of an in-group word. Don't use it. Definitely do not call anybody a Pretendian if you're not yourself native. But they said hashtag no pretend Ian with Ian all in caps, and I gotta say, they kind of ate with that one. I'm so sorry. That one was funny. I think it's also interesting to note that at this time, folks were also doubting and coming for Gallandio. But of course, she's pretty definitively and quickly proven to be Mohawk, so that died down pretty quickly. There was still, even after that, commentary about the colorism and her being light-skinned. But right at first, it's funny to see people be like, I think they're both white. Interesting. I think that's interesting to know. Are people good at just ascertaining indigeneity just by looking? Iffy. So whereas for Ian, proof was not easily ascertained, so the digging began. Proof offered to support his lack of indigeneity ranged from digging up social posts by his conservative family members because, I don't know, I guess because famously there are no conservative native people. I can assure you that's not true. There were assertions that his family had admitted that his family tree had an error, leading them to erroneously claim Cherokee ancestry, though it's unclear to me if folks went through his entire family tree, if this was actually done. It seems like it was done by a family member on Ancestry, and if anybody's played around on Ancestry, those things are not complete or reliable. So I don't really know what side he's even claiming native ancestry through, and if that checks out with the family tree they found. I don't know. But people say that there was some family member who was like, oh yeah, we made an error. There's no Cherokee people. I never found that proof. So that I can find, all of this evidence that was going around was mostly curated by @7jinvoices on Twitter, an account that was made in August of 2021 when all this was popping off, seemingly to call for action. I will say, though, as of April 2022, they are no longer active. So from there, obviously, nothing else really happened. Ian is still cast. Ian is still playing Sokka. And, initially, how did it make me feel as a Cherokee? Annoyed. I was annoyed, but unsurprised if it is true that he's not Cherokee. Like, Cherokee is the go-to tribe for anybody wanting to, spice up their genealogy to go to. The people are like, oh yeah, I've got a little bit of Cherokee. It's also common in Black culture for people to be like, oh, you have really nice hair. You have good hair. You must have a little Indian in you. You must be Cherokee. It's a thing. I've spent my whole life having my identity co-opted. So many white people throughout my life have demanded to know, okay, but what are you? Non-white people of color are usually more tactful, only for them to respond when I tell them, oh my gosh, I'm Cherokee too, which then leads me to assert, no, but I really am Cherokee, which is either met with an eye roll, because I guess I'm being pretentious, I don't really know, or the white person further co-signing my experience and identity. Mind you, this is a conversation I don't even want to be having, because to me, who I am, what I am, all of that is not anybody's business unless I want to make it their business. Alas. Earwax. So years of this led to me developing this kind of complex about if they're a fraud, maybe I'm a fraud, because it just too many people were co-opting my experience that I began to believe maybe our experiences are the same. Maybe I'm a fake, despite having my citizenship card with the rest of my identification, my family tree, my family. I still started to think this because I didn't look Native enough. So, this is not my first rodeo, let's say. This ain't Texas. Yet, even with that experience in my back pocket that I carry around that I've had to work through as far as these complexes and thoughts about identity and myself, etc., my opinion surrounding the resulting discourse really isn't as simple as think bad. Yes, think bad, but that is more my opinion. So I would say probably the main questions are, is he Cherokee? 1. 2, does it matter? I'll answer the last question first. Does it matter whether or not he's actually Cherokee? Yes, and also no. While on-screen representation isn't the end-all be-all for racial justice, it is still important for our identities and lives to be represented on screen to see people that look like us and for our realities not to be whitewashed or erased. But at the same time, the conversation of his potential Cherokee identity has almost entirely obfuscated the fact that the role isn't a Native American role. Even the most enthusiastic detractors accusing him of lying in the same breath acknowledge that he is a white person in a role that should be given to someone Inuk. Because while, yes, the Southern Water Tribe does take inspiration from Chinese and Native American cultures, for sure, it mostly takes inspiration, especially the Southern Water Tribe, from Inuit culture. I feel like we've been so distracted by our personal excitement at representation by this scandal, for lack of a better term, that we've missed the forest for the trees. If it's ever definitively proven that he's Cherokee, that would not suddenly mean that the casting department got this right. These roles, at least a majority, should be played by Inuit actors, and they're not. To prove this, I've gone through a list of roles of all the Water Tribes people that I could ascertain from IMDb, and none of them are Inuk. I've gone through each and every one of them. We'll go through them very quickly just to prove not a one of them are, which I think is the larger problem. Of course, we know Katara, played by Gowan Dio, is Mohawk, not Inuk. Grand Grand is played by a Ponca Indian, not Inuk. Hakoda, Peter Ballantine, Cree Nation, not Inuk. Master Paku is played by A. Martinez, who is Apache and Tegon Blackfeet, not Inuk. A character by the name of Han is played by somebody who's Cumberland House First Nation, which is a pre-sovereign nation, and Red River Métis, not Inuk. Kaya is Rappahannock, not Inuk. There's a character called Male Trainee, who is Nanaus, and Lyaxin, not Inuk. There is Water Tribe Boy, who is unclear mixed race, but also he's a child, so I'm not digging. There's a character called Ado, who's Navajo. There is Girl, who is Cree. There is Chief Arnuk, who is technically uncredited, but is Plains Cree. All of these, not Inuit. There is Injured Warrior, who's Haklit, not Inuk. Princess Yue, who is Assiniboine, not Inuk. There's Avatar Kurk, who is Ojibwe, not Inuk. You're seeing a theme. There is Yagoda. They are Inupiaq, Yupik, and Cree. I will say the first two, this is the closest we get. They are culturally related to the Inuit, but they are not themselves Inuit. So that's a long list to say none of these people are Inuit. So does it really matter if he's Cherokee? Apparently not really for the authenticity of Avatar, in my personal opinion, but it does still matter for those of actual Cherokee descent like me, because we need to see authentic representation. So how does someone prove that they're Native, and who is allowed to ask questions? Well, proving Native identity can be tough work. Native folk often disagree on what all makes Native identity. But as a Black Cherokee Nation citizen, I know we'd like it to be simple, but in my experience, then it's not that simple. It's just really not that simple. So you're going to have two schools of thought and everything in between. So I'm going to talk about the two schools of thought, but know that any one Native person could fall anywhere on this spectrum. So there are those like my own tribal government who believe only those with tribal enrollment, like me, should be able to claim tribal identity as put forth in the joint resolution established in 2008 by both the Cherokee Nation and the Eastern Band of Cherokee. And there are plenty of people, like I said, and other sovereign tribes who agree with that assessment. However, there are those who recognize that gaining enrollment in a federally recognized tribe is a privilege not accessible to every Native. There are a lot of reasons for this, why it can be difficult to just get citizenship, because I can understand the thought like, well, if your mom is Muskogee, why can't you just get Muskogee citizenship? It's complicated. First, there's the paper genocide, which is the intentional destruction of documents or records related to a particular group or people, whether by literal destruction or intentional misclassification. This has made it near impossible for some folks to trace their ancestry back to where they need to get the citizenship that they need. There's being adopted out of their tribe of origin, which used to happen a lot. Having a high degree of Indian ancestry, but from several different tribes, is also pretty common, and you might have so much ancestry from different tribes that you don't necessarily meet requirements for any one tribal citizenship. There's also simply being an urban Native, which is like it sounds. We are simply Native people who live off of tribal lands in urban areas. We make up 71% of American Indians as of 2010. Many of these are descendants of, or are they themselves, those who left their tribal lands during the Indian Relocation Act of 1956 and other similar policies. Urban Natives may have tribal citizenship but be disconnected culturally. Others may not have citizenship but still culturally be connected. Or they may have neither or both. Additionally, being a Black or Latina Native has historically proven to be a struggle gaining recognition and legitimacy among other Natives due to long-standing racist practices within tribal governments, to include descendants of freedmen formerly enslaved by tribes not being allowed citizenship within their tribes despite standing agreements. If you know, you know. And lastly, another barrier is being enrolled with a federally unrecognized tribe because you don't have access to a federally recognized tribe for one reason or the other. I need to highlight, and it's important to note in this conversation, that there are legitimate tribes that are not federally recognized. That recognized tribal governments often fail to recognize the legitimacy of these tribes in effort to bolster their own sovereignty. Feels like neo-colonial politics to me. It forces these tribes into the same designations as actually fraudulent tribes with little distinction. But again, please note, the Southern Cherokee Nation of Kentucky, which is the tribe at the heart of Sokkagate, has many facets of a fraudulent tribe. So all of that isn't to say that tribal governments shouldn't determine who can be a citizen within their nation. As sovereign nations, they can and they should. However, it is to say that, in my opinion, Native identity is not something that could be simplified down to enrollment alone, as nice and easy as that may be. So, like I said, a lot of these barriers to enrollment, of course, do not seem to apply to #Sokkagate, but these are all important to highlight when we are discussing how we define Native identity. As for #Sokkagate specifically, the Cherokee are some of the most well-documented tribes in America. So theoretically, gaining enrollment should be easy relative to other tribal citizenship. All three federally recognized Cherokee tribes require you to trace your ancestry back to some form of roll. The Cherokee Nation, where I'm a citizen, requires it to be the Dawes rolls, while Eastern Band of Cherokee and United Kituwa Band of Cherokee additionally require a certificate of degree of Indian blood based on that identified ancestor, aka blood quantum. They require blood quantum. So theoretically, if you have someone that you are descended from on the Dawes rolls, you could easily get Cherokee citizenship through the Cherokee Nation. I will say personally, I wonder if it really is so easy. Despite having relatives recorded on the Dawes rolls and despite growing up in and around Indian country, my family had a difficult time getting our official enrollment sorted. It took a lot of paperwork and research. In the end, even still, due to reasons that are unclear to us even today, perhaps they were prejudicial, we don't really know, one of our ancestors was credited as having a lower degree of Indian blood, meaning that all of my family members who are enrolled, which not all of them are, CDIB is slightly inaccurate. Now, I don't really care. It doesn't matter for Cherokee Nation citizenship, thankfully, and really doesn't affect my day-to-day life. I think blood quantum is a white supremacist scam, because it is. So who cares? But I just share that story to highlight that easier does not necessarily mean easy. There are plenty of reasons why someone might identify as Cherokee, but not be able to enroll in a federally recognized Cherokee tribe. And how that applies to Ian, if it even applies at all, we will get to. But first, if someone can't prove their enrollment with a federally recognized tribe, what else forms Native identity? There's a lot of ways, through kinship customs, through culture, through language, through incomplete ancestries that are nevertheless legitimate, and so on. You can find Native identity. These are all, of course, a little less tangible, but can be seen present in someone's life. The problem is that if we accept this too as Native identity, it makes Native identity harder to define. It's this ambiguity that bad actors will exploit for their own ends. So the various opinions on this subject ultimately come down to a question of drawing a hard line and accidentally excluding some who might belong, or allowing flexibility, knowing some bad actors might exploit this from time to time. I bring all of this up not because, again, it is all applicable to Sokkagate. I bring it up because there are thousands who are fighting every day to prove that they are Indian enough. Many of them are literally trying to prove it to tribal government. And over the years, through various historical moments, cultural and political movement, the marker of who can be Indian has shifted. At times, this has shifted to be more accessible. At others, it's been held just outside of folks' reach. It's these difficulties that people face that I have in mind when I see online discourse so quick to gleefully paint these things in moralistic tones of black and white, especially when it's done by people outside of our in-group. When people are demanding for Ian to prove his identity and digging through his personal information, his families, his friends, etc., I'm thinking about Native people who exist in the margins, whether because they haven't known that they can come forward or they haven't been allowed. Because imagine, just for a moment, what if we are wrong? None of the evidence supporting the claims that he isn't Cherokee is definitive. It's compelling, sure, but not definitive enough to justify invasive behavior nearing harassment or the doxing of personal information. Is the risk of inflicting that on an actual Native person really worth it? Is the risk of allowing non-Natives to inflict that on an actual Native person worth it? And if it is worth it, what should be the norm? Do we all have to ID ourselves to anyone we reveal our Native identity to? Or perhaps we have to provide some sort of proof to a task force before being granted an opportunity. Should we publish our family trees to the public to secure our jobs and protect our employer from public scrutiny? What about folks who don't have complete access to enrollment or a complete family tree who are nonetheless Native? And on the flip side, are we really going to give the power to non-Native fans, employers, etc. to verify these claims? As proven by Sokkagate happening in the first place, they do not have the skill set to do that. And I don't know of another ethnicity or race that is expected to prove their identity so definitively in America. Though, on the flip side, admittedly, I also don't know of another ethnicity or race so eagerly being co-opted by people in the out-group. So while I think we should continue to endeavor as Indian folk to find a solution, I don't think inviting non-natives within pop culture space to participate and support in the most exclusionary behaviors is the vibe, y'all. I just don't. And maybe perhaps you're thinking, don't worry, Delia, only the bad actors should have to prove themselves. Besides, Native people can intuitively tell who is and isn't really Native. Didn't you just say yourself when you're talking to white people and they're like, oh, I'm Cherokee too, you just know that they're lying? And yeah, sometimes our intuition can help us spot somebody who's faking. Maybe often our intuition works, but it's certainly not an infallible system. Take Jacqueline Keeler, publisher of the infamous alleged Pretendian list. It's a list with around 200 names of notable figures whose claims of indigeneity, Jacqueline and others, found dubious. Several of the people on that list were proven to be, in fact, Native. I'm not sure the percentages of the people on the list that were found to be Native versus not, but how many is too many to justify a witch hunt? In my opinion, one is too many. I don't say all of this to say people who are eager to see the downfall of Pretendians or people who do a couple of Google searches into people's background are the worst of the worst, like Jacqueline Keeler is. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is that Native intuition alone is not enough to allow us to wield suspicions of identity like a cudgel against anyone who doesn't fit our notion of what it is to be Native. Now, please understand, we do need to protect our spaces. We need to protect our identities. It's just that for me, more than we need to do that, we need to correct for the traumas and genocide our people have suffered. The only way to do that, in my opinion, is to open our gates to everyone who belongs. The cost of getting this wrong and alienating our people lost in the margins is too high to afford this kind of gatekeeping. It's due to all of this complexity regarding Native identity that I am not surprised that without an expert in the room, that definitive proof wasn't at the ready regarding Ian's background when questions came up. Either the production did see proof at the time of casting without any way of knowing its veracity, or they never even asked for proof, not feeling it their place to interrogate someone's identity, which, to be honest, I don't think that instinct for a non-native is incorrect. However, they should have worked alongside Indigenous people or experts in casting Indigenous people who would have been knowledgeable in developing the standard for casting and verifying claims of identity. So what do we do now? Especially allies. What do I think that allies should do in this situation? I know y'all want to help. I know that's where a lot of this comes from. But as you can see, it's a little bit complicated. So I think it's best, and in fact, probably really helpful if you would just sit this one out. Like, just sit this one out. You don't have to, it's cool. We got this. We're working on it. We'll get you the minutes later. Don't worry about it. Just kind of sit this one out. I would instead spend time listening to Indigenous folks. And when I say listen to Indigenous folks, I mean it. Do not just listen to me. Do not just listen to inflammatory Twitter accounts or Reddit posts or whatever, wherever people be online these days. I don't really know because Twitter isn't even Twitter anymore. Don't just listen to things getting the most engagement online. Listen broadly. Take in the nuance and see how Native Americans are navigating with each other across tribes and varied backgrounds. If among them they have calls to action or information you find enlightening, do the calls to actions. Share the things you find interesting with sources, of course, with links, of course. But what should not be happening is there should not be petitions calling for a potentially Native person to be forced to identify themselves further and prove they are Native enough, started by non-natives, as well-meaning as they may be. Native people only owe explanations to fellow Native folk, if we owe any at all. If an Indigenous person solicits your help as an ally in these endeavors, that's different. Go ahead and do that, but state that that is what you're doing. You have to know when it's time to take the backseat, and this is definitely one of those times. Maybe you're thinking this is all just a bit too charitable, whether you're Native or not. Isn't this giving Ian the benefit of the doubt? Aren't I assuming that he is Native? And simply, no. All this assumes that a lot more stands to be gained by focusing on keeping spaces more open and welcoming for Native people searching for belonging who have violently been separated from their homes, history, and culture and identity by colonial powers. I think it's totally fine to be side-eyeing when we're suspicious of ill motive. That's more than fine. I too am and also fine is supporting Native voices asking the questions that need to be asked. Go ahead and give those tweets a little retweet. Go ahead and upvote those Reddit posts, whatever the case may be. But until Sokkagate is definitively resolved, I will be focusing my energy on those who are Native, listening to their voices on topics around this fandom and beyond. And I encourage others, especially non-Native people, to do the same. Of course, then if it is definitively confirmed that he's not Native, then we will absolutely call for accountability and amends. We will be adding Netflix, let me tell you what. And when I say we will be adding Netflix, I do not mean we will be harassing people, because I believe we are all of us, me too, raise your hand, products of a carceral state system, and we should interrogate that little truth within. I don't want carceral logic in my fandom. I fight against it all the time. It's very common online to see people just with this punitive mindset, because that is the society we're raised in, and I'm trying to do away with that. So even then, if and when it is definitively proven that he is in fact not Cherokee, just a white man parading as a Cherokee person, again, if and when, I want to focus on productive voices and ideas and actual restorative measures, not merely punitive. And it can be done. Elizabeth Warren has repeatedly apologized for her blunder. Is that being a little too nice? Not sure. She's worked with Cherokee Nation leaders to understand the issue. She has gone on the record explaining what she did wrong for those who might defend her, and she has supported Native causes since then. All right, yes, okay, but I hear you. You're saying, but is he Native, woman? Please tell us, is he Native? If you've made it this far to hear me, a Cherokee woman, point my finger accusingly, I am sadly going to have to disappoint it. Ugh. Sorry, not only because I don't want to be another voice in the fandom fervor that, in my opinion, lost the real plot of casting, but also it's because we just simply do not know. And that is the truth. You will see evidence floating around, and you can form your suspicions, you can form your conjectures, that's more than fine, but to say definitively that we know one way or the other is just not true. So I cannot tell you. We've never seen his entire family tree. I'm not even certain he's seen his entire family tree, nor have we heard from him why it is that he thinks he's Cherokee in the first place. And I do hope that he has reason, that it's a good reason, and that the production knows of it too. Why they haven't said anything, that's anyone's questions, but I hope it exists. But at this point, there is no smoking gun, as it were. And for those who are researching ancestry trees, it's not that simple. I will link to the work. There is a Twitter thread by the person who researched Elizabeth Warren's genealogy, talking about just how long that took to make a definitive conclusion that no, in fact, she is not Native. It is not as simple as a quick little Google against census records. So I will leave that in the show notes. However, as I said, what I can share are my suspicions. But please note, for the love of all things fandom, that this is only my opinion. My opinion, even as a singular one, I am one Cherokee Nation citizen, is not actionable, nor is it proof of anything. For my part, I am only using my intuition, my suspicions, to guide my critical analysis of the overall work, the show, the live action, the promo, the press, all of that, and the actions of the production. So first question, is he Native? Of the info that was dug up online, which I don't necessarily approve of people's methods, but of the information that has been surfaced, there is not strong evidence that he is Cherokee. He is enrolled in a federally unrecognized tribe, but as I said, there are legitimate and not legitimate kind of fraudulent tribes that are not federally recognized. And the Southern Cherokee Nation of Kentucky, it don't look good for them. They do share a lot of traits with other proven fraudulent tribes. But equally, I personally have not seen strong evidence that he did not believe on some level, at least at the time of casting, that he was really Cherokee. Some of the evidence floating around online meant to refute his claims of Cherokee ancestry actually gave credence to the fact that some of his family did seem to genuinely be participating in their so-called tribe for years, dubious as that tribe may be. So it is very hard for me to say definitively that he at 19 knew for a fact he was not Cherokee and knowingly took a role away from another Indigenous person. Though I do acknowledge this is a distinction that will not matter to some people, and I get that. I agree that if he isn't Cherokee, though he thought he was, that does not mean there wasn't harm done. Again, look at Elizabeth Warren. Hello? For me personally, it's just a mitigating factor to sentencing, if you will. And let's take a moment, a moment for non-natives. If you're claiming Native identity, please look up the requirements of the tribe that you're trying to claim. Look up the requirements for enrollment or identification if they don't have official enrollment. Look those up and follow them, because tribes are sovereign and they get to dictate how people identify. You don't necessarily have to agree. I don't agree with my own tribe's statement that only people enrolled in federally recognized Cherokee tribes can identify as Cherokee. I don't like that policy, but I recognize the Cherokee Nation's sovereignty to be able to put that forward as the standard. And you should too. So if you suspect that you might be Native, you're like, yeah, I think I had like an Apache grandmother or whatever, get your paperwork together, work with a genealogist, do your research. In the wise words of the Degrassi theme song. So that's my opinion with the knowledge we have now in February 2024. Let's timestamp it. Unless something new comes up or it directly affects his performance, which, is possible, I'm not going to spend much time talking about Ian's identity after this, one way or the other. I don't personally feel it will be productive. Instead, I will continue to pay attention to how the actual Indigenous people in his life are interacting with him, and I'll be watching how he moves in and around Native folks in our spaces. That's the type of stuff I'm going to be clocking if there's any issue at all. And more than that, I will be publicly focusing on and questioning how such clumsy work could be done at casting for a show that's supposed to be so revolutionary in its representation. And I'll be focusing on how Native Americans and First Nations people came to be cast in much larger numbers, in fact, at all, instead of Inuit. Because remember, there were no Indigenous people or experts in Indigenous casting working on the show that I can see from the IMDb listed credits. Nobody's corrected me yet, but I'm not seeing anything. Had there been, maybe Ian's heritage would have been made clearer or better verified by people by whom it would be appropriate to engage in research further. And maybe the fallout stemming from people's doubt would have been better handled for the public's benefit, but also for his benefit, protecting him and his family should he actually turn out to be Cherokee. If he isn't Cherokee, then with actual Indigenous people in the casting room, likely he wouldn't have been cast at all. And moreover, with Indigenous people doing the casting, ideally him being Cherokee would have been a moot point, because they should have cast more Inuit actors in a fictional culture heavily inspired by our real-world Inuit culture. Skepticism and pushing productions to think of representation beyond what's on our screens is where I feel we can affect the most change at this point. It's important we let studios know we will not be placated with a veneer of authenticity. So in conclusion, 1. Is Ian Ousley Cherokee? He certainly is an Inuk. 2, listen and follow Native people's lead. 3, get more Native people behind the scenes 2K forever. And 4, let's find a better way to gatekeep girl boss our culture without further alienating people who do need to be let in. Whew. I think that about covers it. If you got this far, bless you, laddie. Thank you so much. I hope it was informative or at least helpful in understanding my analysis of the show moving forward. I am very curious to know what y'all's thoughts are on all of this. Curious and scared. Concerned. Excited? All of those. Do you have any questions? Because let me tell you, there was so much I wanted to dive deeper on, but this episode was already really, really long. So if you have well-intentioned questions, please leave it in the comments below and I will be answering them to the best of my ability. Come this time next week, we will be in full show mode. Ooh, I'm so excited. Subscribe here so you don't miss any of my super important and entertaining commentary about the show. And by that, I mean, there's going to be a lot of shouting. There's going to be a lot of nerding out. So if you dig it, subscribe. We can also continue the conversation on socials. You can follow me on Twitter and IG at Delia is Typing. This pod also has some socials at GaangPod. That's gang as an ang with 2 A's. See you next week to discuss the first episode. Until then, yip yip and gang gang.